Thank you for joining us. Thank you online for being here. Thank you to Rural Migrant Ministries for hosting us and for our meetings. We're here on behalf of the Board of the National Farm Worker Ministry, which works to connect people with faith and conscience to support the work of farm worker justice and organizing. We will have hopefully a very informative and lively conversation. We'll spend maybe 30 or 40 minutes, we'll see how it goes, of kind of a conversation between the three of us, and then we'll open it for some broader conversation and questions. My name is Nathan Hosler. I'm the president of the board for the National Farm Worker Ministry. I direct the Office of Peacebuilding and Policy for the Church of the Brethren based in DC and work in policy, legal, social change space there. I'm also a pastor in DC. We're grateful to have our panelists here. Before we dive into this, I'm going to invite Laura LaCour from Rural and Migrant Ministries to give a greeting and welcome to this space and to this work.
Thank you everyone for coming. This is a last minute sort of substitution. I'm not a public speaker. I wish I had MS skills, which I don't, but I do have other skills which are missing. Anyway, Richard couldn't be here, so he sent his apologies and asked me to just say a couple of words about the history of RMM and how we fit into this group, which Emma so rightfully said. There's so much work to be done that it takes working with different advocacy groups, social justice groups, in order to get the work done. And we really need a lot more because the work is so, especially now, it's just gotten super overwhelming. So anyway, some of the basics he wrote down that he wanted me to share with you were that RMM and Farm Worker Legal Services, Worker Justice is the original name, joined together with other organizations in the 1990s to create the Justice for Farm Workers campaign. CITA, which is CITA, which is Centro Independiente de Trabajadores Agrícolas, which is an independent farm workers association, grassroots farm worker organization, which became independent, was part of the campaign. Other groups included the Farm Migrant Program, Migrant Education, and other farm worker serving agencies. It was decided that CITA would lead the farm worker organizing component, Farm Worker Legal Services would lead the litigation component, and since none of the other agencies could engage in advocacy, RMM would lead the legislative advocacy component. The original campaigns, and all of this is on our website if anybody wants to look, the original campaigns focused on getting drinking water in fields, and then a few years later, field sanitation. It was all successful, and then the same minimum wages of the workers, which was also successful. The Justice of Farm Workers campaign sponsored a statewide assembly of farm workers across the state, and at that assembly, the workers decided that they wanted all of the exclusions within New York State's labor laws removed. For example, day arrest, overtime pay, disability insurance, and especially the lack of protections of marketing collectively, which they were not allowed to do. It took close to 20 years for the campaign to succeed.
If you could be a little bit louder or closer to
Yes, sure. Slowly we built the coalition to stand with the workers, unions, faith communities, colleges, activists, and other organizations. We had marches, vigils, scores of legislative visits with 200 or more people visiting Albany. The major barrier was that the Republicans controlled the Senate. So, and for many of those years, they also controlled the governorship in New York. So finally in 2019, the Democrats controlled it all. It still wasn't easy. We faced major opposition from the Farm Bureau, but finally in 2019 it passed the Farm Laborers Fair Workers Practices Act. So that's part of the history. As far as the present and the key challenges, we go to the fear from the presence of the Border Patrol and Homeland Security, which Emma touched on. One of the top issues that they've always faced: discrimination, physical and sexual abuse, and what Emma has spoken to better than I can, wage theft, trafficking. And what we can do to be in solidarity with farm workers, support their organizing campaigns and the right to organize, which is under great threat by the Farm Bureau right now, and ag interests. And that's part of that history that we're going to share with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Again, thank you for hosting us here. I'll very briefly introduce our two main panelists, and then they can expand and explain some of the work. And I'll frame that in the questions. So to my immediate right is Wilmer Jimenez, who is the Chief Program Officer for Rural and Migrant Ministries, which we've heard some of the history from already. He's an educator and activist for change with a broad range of community-based experience. I believe in the promotional material you have his more extended bio, so I won't read it. If you want to add anything that's part of your narrative as we start, please feel free to do that. And then a little bit further down the road, we have Emma Witt, who is the Worker Justice Center for New York Advocacy, Outreach, and Education Director. And so she brings much experience. And what Laura briefly mentioned, which those online did not hear, is we heard a fair amount about the Worker Justice Center's work. And so as we start, I'll invite a bit more expansion tying into one of the things that I find particularly interesting from the National Farm Worker Ministry, as well as our work, is that we get to work in wide coalitions of both identity and communities, as well as particular skill sets. And so we talked a little bit about the education, the advocacy, the legal elements, and then we also talk about the other forms of organizing. So to start us off, maybe I'll turn to Emma first, since we had a little bit of from Rural Migrant Ministries just from Laura, and then we'll go to Wilmer. Can you give a little bit of background on your organization? Again, some of those in the room had that, but for those online and recording, the great. And then also a little bit of detail on how and who you partnered with to work to pass this 2019 Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act. So the process, and we'll get into more of the details of both the opportunities and the challenges of that as we continue.
So the Worker Justice Center of New York is a not-for-profit legal services and advocacy organization that dates back to 1981. We were originally formed as Farm Worker Legal Services of New York. And through the course of the past 44 years, we have evolved. In 2011, we merged with the Worker Rights Law Center and became the Worker Justice Center of New York. Which came with a shift in our mission, but we have always had a focus on serving the legal needs of farm workers, ensuring access to justice, and fighting for improved protections for farm worker communities in terms of both legal and legislative advocacy. I should say I appreciate Laura's historical summary. My first exposure to the Justice for Farm Workers campaign came when I was a student in the late 90s and early 2000s. So my first participation in some of these actions that Laura described was probably around 2000, 2001. And when I graduated in 2002, I went to work at Rural and Migrant Ministries. So much of my perspective on this campaign comes from the time I spent working at RMM. I've been with the Worker Justice Center now since 2012, the beginning of 2012, so quite some time. And in terms of the coalition that formed, I think Laura characterized it pretty accurately. My memories from 25 years ago are of, very robust coalition meetings, very spirited coalition meetings that included, representatives from Farm Worker Legal Services at that point, from RMM, and from CETA, among other organizations. It was a very prolonged fight, right? Almost 20 years in the making. To achieve what was a really ambitious omnibus bill that amended many different areas of the law. And I give RMM a lot of credit because while it was certainly a coalition, RMM was very persistent in keeping the momentum going through some very difficult years of legislative advocacy under political conditions that were less than ideal. And bringing in also union partners to help drive kind of our inside strategy in Albany. So my personal involvement in the campaign kind of ebbed and flowed at different points over the years. The year that the bill passed, I was very focused on passing the driver's license bill, which, like I mentioned earlier, it was a Monday when we passed the driver's license bill and a Wednesday when the farm worker bill passed. It was a pretty monumental month of June in 2019 that I'll never forget. It was for me at least, two lost causes that I've been working on from my entire adult life. that came to fruition. So it was very, very rewarding. The one thing I will mention, in addition to the history that Laura mentioned, there was this very critical shift in the balance of power legislatively in Albany that certainly set the conditions for us to be able to win both of these campaigns, actually. The other thing that was happening was that we had participated in a lawsuit against the state of New York. So I think that lawsuit was filed in 2015 or 16. I'm losing the thread a little bit here, but there was a small group of farm workers that were coming together to organize a health and safety committee on a dairy farm, and they were fired in retaliation for doing that. One of those individuals, Crispina Hernandez, came forward and was the primary plaintiff in a lawsuit against the state. This was a constitutional challenge. We were also, our organization, along with the Worker Center of Central New York, were also plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the state, represented by the New York Civil Liberties Union. And what basically we were arguing is that the state constitution guarantees collective bargaining protections for workers. Regardless, there's no exclusionary language in the Constitution, but the statute excluded farm workers. That litigation took some time, but we received a decision in the spring of 2019, right as we were, the campaign was ramping up under these more favorable political conditions. So it became, basically what happened is the state attorney general said, we actually agree with you. We are not going to we're not going to defend against this lawsuit. So it became sort of seen as maybe more inevitable that farm workers would eventually gain the right to collective bargaining. But it was certainly not a given that the bill would pass, that year. I think it was kind of a perfect storm of conditions that really, and 20 years of organizing that had really laid the groundwork for that victory. There's a lot to say about what happened afterward, and of course, there were over the years many different versions of that bill. There were negotiations that happened, concessions that happened in the crafting of that final bill. So we can get into the weeds of that a little bit more, but I want to give Wilmer a chance to comment. So I'm sure he has his own perspective on that time frame.
Yeah, so, well, thank you everyone again for being here. It's really nice day out there. My perspective is a little bit different than Emma, especially because, first I want to thank Laura for giving that great, overview and the history. It amazes me because my perspective comes from the first hand with workers. Back I joined RMM back in 2020, and prior to that, my whole high school and college career was working for Migrant, which I went out there in dairy farms and apple farms and packaging centers to do little basics of English, classes. And that's where I started to hear about the campaign and a lot of the things that I guess goes hand in hand with some of the questions there for the panel in terms about challenges. It was the support that all of these organizations were getting from our people, because a lot of, and I say also a lot of us, because back then also I was part of, I would work summers in a dairy farm as well. Well, way before coming into actually deciding to pursue a high school career, I was a dairy worker as well. And I definitely do agree with a lot of the things that Emma stated in terms of the conditions, which, because I also saw it firsthand. I had people and friends who went through a lot of injustices in many different ways that they were afraid of speaking up. But back then it was 2008, so I had no idea about Workers' Justice Center or RMM or Migrant. So until it wasn't in 2010 when I started working with the community, because I left the dairy farms. But one of the things that I will always come in contact with was there were advocates out there bringing the information to the community about the campaign, the importance of it, and the challenge was that a lot of our community members tend to have a hard time on believing is it really gonna happen or not. And like it was mentioned, to 20 years. So just imagine, when you're trying to bring a campaign to a community, you're like, oh, this might, and they ask you, oh, how long do you think it's gonna take? And you tell them, it's gonna take long. But if you tell them in a range like 10, 20 years, they kind of get like discouraged and like things like that, right? But one of the beauties about all of this is that as we did have many of our community members who were still, um, kind of on the system on whether are we supporting this, we also had like that group of people that say, okay, yeah, we are supporting, we are definitely doing this. And back then, I was also, very involved with Migrant Ed, so I was also listening from the Migrant Ed about the support, and also with Mary Yo, which is the Cornell the Cornell Migrant Program, which also led me to RMN. And all of those names, Worker Justice Center was already there, also established because of the work that Worker Justice Center had been doing among the dairy farms. There was a lot of injustices, so I do remember, a lot of people mention Worker Justice Centers because that was kind of like the contact that people would get whenever there was an injustice happening uh, in a dairy farm. And in my, I guess my perspective was most about the challenges, because I feel like even though we came with all together, all the coalitions, all the partners came together to fight for this cause, there's always the need for testimonies. There's always the need for that group of workers who want to stand up and be out there. There's always the need for that brave person to share their stories. And and I feel like back then there was a lot of fear on terms of retaliation, on whether if I speak up with my, am I gonna get fired? Even though there was a reassurance of no, we're here for you. Even though if you say anything, you're protected. But it was hard to kind of also work with them because convincing is a whole different thing. It's like and the type of work that we do is all about nurturing, working with communities, with the families, and getting them to trust us. Otherwise, we can't just drive by a farm, stop by, and be like, "Hey, we need your support on this," but they never will see us again. And that was also an issue because back then, uh, a lot of workers complained about that. They complained that a lot of organizations would stop by and get information, uh, but never see them again. So it was just all of that, right? So that I see as a big challenge in terms that all of these organizations were facing, because we can't get things moving if we're not working, all together. So that's more like my perspective being there in the agriculture field back then, and listening and hearing, listening from people and hearing from these big organizations that been on their front lines.
Thank you. So we both touched a little bit on the challenges. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, and I guess the sub question to that'll move us a little bit towards future things. What do you learn about those challenges that help us frame and think about our current work, the current political changes and landscape? The few that I picked up from the challenges are kind of alluded to, and we could tease them out a little bit. I'd be welcome that. One was mentioned by both of you, the duration of this. 20 years is quite some time. I work in DC. Things happen very quickly, and then something will happen. It'll have a very long shelf life that's often problematic. And so,
these are generational fights. Like the kind of change we want to see is not going to happen quickly. I think that's very clear to any of us who've been in organizing spaces for any amount of time. I think certainly having wins helps us provide some kind of sense of hope that there's movement forward. So certainly having the win that we had in 2019 was critical. But there certainly have been a lot of challenges. I think what I have to remind myself and remind others is like we're 6 years into this, not even 6 years into the implementation of this bill. We are going to have a lot of work to do, and in terms of farm worker organizing, there's just no shortcut. It's very, very difficult work that's going to take years and years of organizing to be able meaningful change, and I think we just have to remind ourselves of that. But I guess the one thing I didn't say before, I didn't talk so much about the opposition to the bill. Laura mentioned it a little bit, you know, the entrenched interests of New York agribusiness. I mean, there's no way to overstate how powerful that was. The Farm Bureau kind of led the opposition to the passage of that legislation, but it certainly wasn't just the Farm Bureau. It was, you know, it was a major obstacle in passing the legislation, and it continues to be a major roadblock for effective implementation of this bill. And frankly, the sort of bald-faced union busting that's been going on is, you know, that's something I think we can definitely dig into. Another thing that happened, of course, is that this bill went into effect January 1st of 2020, which of course was just a couple months before the COVID lockdown. That lockdown certainly impeded early union organizing efforts. It also prolonged the wage board process. And in terms of, just to explain what that is, the bill that passed in 2019 set the overtime threshold at 60 hours a week, with the proviso that the state would convene a wage board to decide on the future of the overtime threshold. So 60 was meant to be a provisional threshold. The wage board was meant to study the issue, make a recommendation, and then the Department of Labor was and the governor were meant to then implement the final recommendations. That process took a lot longer than it should have because of COVID. So it was not until September of 2023 that the Department of Labor adopted the final overtime regulations, which are basically, it's incrementally reducing the overtime threshold to 40 hours a week eventually, which will happen by 2032. So right now, the overtime threshold for farm workers is at 56 hours a week. It will go down next year to 52 and eventually get down to 40. The wage board process was very prolonged because of COVID. The organizing was really had barely started and came to a screeching halt. But it did give growers and employers a really big opening to shape the narrative around what a union is, what organizing means, because they had they have captive audiences, and there were very few ways that anyone else could reach workers to counter the anti-union messaging that workers were getting during that lockdown period. The other thing that happened is that the New York State Vegetable Growers Association, along with several individual employers where the UFW was organizing, brought a lawsuit. That was in October of 2023. This lawsuit is ongoing because, of course, there's appeal upon appeal. I could talk for a long time about it. I am not a lawyer, I should say. I could talk for a long time about this lawsuit. Suffice it to say, these are not, the arguments that are being made in this lawsuit are, in my view, not good faith legal arguments. They are claiming that essentially union busting is free speech, and that the Fair Labor Practices Act violates the U.S. Constitution. They say that the administrative the agency that essentially oversees the collective bargaining processes within the farm worker sector is called the PERB. They claim that the PERB process does not provide employers with enough opportunities to make their case. They say that farm owners should be able to represent worker voices in the lawsuit. They believe that farm owners should be allowed to prohibit organizers from visiting farm workers in their homes when that housing is located on the farm. These are all really arguments that don't have much legal. They're not legally sound, but it's been an incredibly effective delay tactic. The lawsuit included a temporary restraining order and a motion for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. And although that restraining order was not ordered by the court, the state agreed to pause proceedings at the PERB, which meant that while farm workers could still file like complaints with the PERB or file petitions with the PERB, the decisions were paused. So there was this 6-month period or so until there was a preliminary hearing where all decisions were paused. What this meant is that all of the work that organizers and unions have been doing to get petition for certification, try to negotiate contracts, it all got delayed. And there were other implementation issues with the PERB as well. Like during COVID, they weren't accepting electronic filings, but there was nobody accepting mail at the office. So, things just took way longer than they should have, and it gave employers a real opportunity to engage in union busting. So there were all of these kind of administrative and logistical delays that I think have certainly impeded the union organizing efforts. And it's hard. It would be hard under the best of circumstances, I should say. Like I said, there's no shortcut to organizing. So these are some of the challenges that we've been facing kind of during the implementation period. I could say more, but I'll pause for now.
Great. I'll let you pick up on that question. I'd like you to layer in on this, how, as an organizer, you work to build trust as one of the reactions. And then we're going to start looking towards this year and the ongoing. So I'll frame that again, but I'll keep with you more once we get to that point.
I really appreciate all of everything that you said, because I feel like that lays out just what was happening at the statewide level. But then it comes to the 2020 hit where COVID, and what Emma was mentioning, the advantage that a lot of the farmers took of COVID to implement their own policies and their own farms with, I guess I would say, false information to employees. So they also felt like they were being protected by their own, employers, which was a, complete lie, but also is like a brainwashed moment. And one example I could say in terms of, there were farms that would come in and place a sign, says no one is allowed to come in, right? And then and then they would phrase it as, oh, it's COVID, you can't come in, don't invite any guests or anything like that, but anyone. But when after the bill was passed in 2019, RMM, when we discovered that there was a lot of lack of trust, a lack of good information, lack of that base building community within RMM, that's where we decided that for the next few years we were going to focus on base building, and that's where we started to merge ourselves more into the community, creating more relationships, and that's where we came across those. I would say we came across those moments where we had to face the owner, and he coming in by saying, "Don't you see a sign? It says that you are not allowed in this property because one is COVID, also it's illegal, and they don't want you here." And it was also for me, because I had to deal with that myself in person. It was kind of like eye-opening in two things. One, I would be like, okay, excuse my language, I'd be like, do you think I'm dumb? Like, do you think I don't understand like what you're trying to do? But they would come in a very strong way, stating why they had like these signs and why we couldn't see the workers and why we couldn't provide information. But also, what they didn't know is that a lot of them during the pandemic, a lot of the workers, they also were in need of masks. They were in need of some food. They were in need of a lot of things, right? That a lot of organizations were trying to provide. And that's where we also discovered a lot of the false information about what the Farm Bureau was providing to the farmers for them to provide to their employees. As as Emma mentioned, having them in a isolated room, like I guess farm, where they could come in and say, okay, the union will take your money away. Uh, the union will steal from you. We heard that the union did this and everywhere, right? And we heard so many things about if you sign up with the union, they will be start taking $100 off your check every single pay period. If the union is not a good thing, if you gonna, but they were some they were also making it sound in a way that uh, everything that was for their own benefit was the opposite. And and unfortunately, a lot of the people they believe it because we and dairy workers, farm owners have discovered that they will put a person in charge who is another Hispanic person or not someone else who works there who has had a relationship with the workers, and they would make this person a supervisor, right? But this supervisor will have a title as a supervisor, but in most cases they don't even know what a supervisor actually, what the role of a supervisor is. So then there are all these violations that are happening in the farm, but for them it's just like, oh, it's just something that I was told by the owner that it's not a big deal, right? So then when owners were providing that information, the farmers were providing that information about the unions, about all the laws, the new laws were passing, and to the workers, they were making it sound like anyone who comes in and gives you that information, they are lying. They will try to get to you, and it's not gonna work. So we had to actually deal with a lot of that because we would come in and they would be like, oh yeah, they already told us about all of this, and they said that you we shouldn't talk to you. And then we had in a few occasions we had about 20 workers who were ready to hear us out because we are there just to educate. That's our job, to educate. We're not there to say sign. We're not there to say you should do this or you should do that. It was more like, here is what was passed. This is what we're doing and educating you so you know about your rights. And suddenly, out of those 20, only one will show up. Why? Because either the supervisor went to the owner and said, "Oh, someone from so and so is coming to provide information and things like that," and then the owner would say, "Tell them everyone that they shouldn't be meeting with this person because otherwise, this and that." And there were a lot of times, which this is kind of my favorite part. There were a lot of times where I would confront the owner, and the owner would always say, "Oh, you guys are more than welcome to come and provide education. I don't know. My supervisor is the one that deals with that." So they would wash their hands just like that by saying, "Oh, my supervisor is the one who does that. I don't have any contact with the people." And, and that happened in so many occasions. For example, during COVID, when they were violating the rights of a worker by making them work while they had COVID and having a letter from the doctors about that. So all of those challenges during COVID, while it kind of doubled our work in so many ways. But it's just a little bit. I know we're probably running out of time, so
Yeah, we'll try and round up and have some space for open questions. So I'm going to keep with you, and then we'll go back to Emma. So we've talked about some of the implementation challenges on this particular piece of legislation, but there are of course other areas that you're working. So looking at the rest of 2025, or perhaps for the next year, what are some key challenges that farm workers continue to face today? I think probably for both of you, I mean particularly for Emma, how does that intersect with other worker challenges that you come across, and how do we learn from those other struggles as well as in the farm worker space specifically? So Wilmer, I'll turn with you, and then.
Well, as my new role, my job is to go everywhere in the regions, and I always have to say this to everyone that one of the best ways to connect with the community is actually connect with the community. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, we're connecting with the community," but what does that mean? Doesn't just go onto your office and see if anyone shows up, or like Emma said, going out there and meeting with the families at 8 p.m. at night because they just got out of work and they don't have any other time, but they really need the help. So that is what what I've been doing, just connecting with all of our regions and our communities, talking to the people directly. And right now, we all agree the administration is a it's part of one of the our biggest challenge right now to um, get to our people. One, because first there's so much information going on that it's hard to distinguish what's real and what isn't, and everyone just panics. And how do we keep everyone in a place where, okay, so this is the real thing and this is what isn't, right? So thankfully, working with the people that we work with, we are able to have that one-on-one conversation and have that direct number. That's actually one of my favorite parts. I'm sure Emma loves that too. When a worker calls you directly and say, "Hey, they have I have this question for you," right? And a lot of that is it becomes even makes it harder for us to hold in-person events for you know providing the Know Your Rights workshops. It's hard for us to hold in-person events to have an adult education about any other continuing education for our community that they have chosen to do, because I mean part of our what we do is we ask them, what do you want to learn, and we'll make it happen. And most of the times that is in person, but sometimes it's like because it can be assumed and not a lot of people sign up for it. It becomes so those challenges are border patrol, raids, immigration, all of that. We're seeing that big time around these areas. I live in Poughkeepsie now. Uh, I yeah, so I moved to this area, but now I'm able to see a full range of what is going on in terms of Watertown, Oswego. Then we go all the way to here, Sullivan County, Middletown, Newburgh, and all the way Long Island. Learning about how every region is being targeted differently in terms of raids and border patrol, but creating the same thing, which is fear. And in all of that, I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Emma, but just 2 days ago, I got a phone call from these workers from the area of Ethica that now banks are requiring the worker. Well, there's one specific bank, Tompkins Bank, is requiring workers to fill out a form with their information again and social security number, where they're coming from, where the money's coming from, in order for them to get exchange their paycheck. And at first I was like, no, I don't believe it. So we had our financial equity coordinator, because now RMM has we're a credit union that we have gone on. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But I spoke with our financial equity coordinator. I was like, can you call the bank and ask what exactly is going on? And the bank came back and said, yep, we are doing that. We just started doing that 2 weeks ago. And now it's like, what's going to happen? So now that's also creating another type of fear among the workers by asking themselves the question, should I be exchanging my paycheck now? Because what if I go in, they get my information, and suddenly Border Patrol shows up, ICE shows up at my front door? Is that gonna, even though the bank did say to us, we are not sharing this information, but we have heard this so many times everywhere that it's hard to say, okay, this is true. You're not sharing that information. But then we go back into now people taking advantage of our community, where now if they don't go to a bank and they go to a local store or somewhere, they get charged up to even 25. Actually, I was surprised once in the Woken area by Rochester, that a relative of mine got charged $50 just to exchange their paycheck in a small store. And it was 50. I was like $50. I even said, You know, you could have just signed the check and give it to me, and I will sign it. I put it in my bank, and then I put out just cash out the check. But then it's like you can't do that. It's like, but I'm like, that's crazy. You know, just $50 out of your that's a whole internet bill, Wi-Fi, not even, but still. So all of that. So there's a lot of a lot of things going on. But one of the biggest fear right now is definitely rates going on and what's gonna be next. What's happening. So Emma, I'll let you maybe add a little bit to that.
I'm going to keep you with the challenges, but also layer the next question because I would like to have some space. So, and that's a lot. But what can National Farm Worker Ministry do as a national organization to support these efforts? And are there other national efforts that can support these efforts? And so we're talking about challenges. So
trying to integrate this all. I mean, I guess one thing I want to say is that it's not like no progress has been made on the farm worker organizing front. I kind of paused in my account of some of that, but there are the UFCW Local 338 has a couple of contracts with vineyard, very small units, vineyard workers out on Long Island. UFCW has gotten 4 contracts through arbitration. They're mostly focusing on larger workforces that include H-2A workers. The employers are refusing to follow the contracts, which is a real wild decision. So we're going to see how that plays out. That's relatively recent. There's 4 employers that are just flat out refusing to recognize the contracts that were basically awarded through arbitration. And there are farm workers that are interested in forming independent farm worker unions. So there is definitely interest, there's activity, there's a lot of sort of legal fights and organizing fights going on. I don't want to paint a picture like nothing has happened. A lot of really hardworking people are doing tremendous and courageous things. But I do think until there's like real proof of concept of what a contract can do for people, it will be harder to make the case and build that trust. It's so interesting what you were talking about with COVID and how employers were saying, don't let anyone on here because we have to protect you from COVID. Well, of course, now with ICE, they're protecting workers from ICE, which is legitimate, but it's become this strategy also to prevent workers from talking to anyone at all. And Wilmer and I both have done a fair amount of door knocking in this in the past few months, and I've definitely had workers from behind a door saying, I have to call my boss first to ask if I'm allowed to talk to you. And of course, we don't want to pressure anyone we don't want to encourage people to open the door to strangers. But we also want to make sure that workers are very clear on what their rights are, including their right to talk to whoever they darn well please when they're not at work, right? So in terms of, current challenges, that is kind of ongoing, right? It's hard to overstate the climate of fear and what it does to people. And as you kind of mentioned earlier, of course, it doesn't just have to do with farm worker organizing. It is impacting and exacerbating labor abuses across the board, contributing to greater isolation. People are afraid to seek access to medical care, to often leave the farm at all, right? So anytime there is, it just contributes to the, people aren't accessing basic services, much less engaging in community organizing conversations in many instances. In terms of what to do, it's hard to answer the question of like, what can we do as a national organization? Because I don't think there's a one size fits all response to this. I know that, we are focusing a lot on legal rights education work and on the legal support side of things. There are, of course, many non-unionized workers whose rights are being violated around concerted activity. Of course, you can engage in concerted activity even if you're not part of a union. So we're trying to really focus on educating workers about the anti-retaliation protections that do apply to them. But you cannot convince people, nor can you guarantee people that they will be safe from immigration. You just can't. So, yeah, I think this is a tough one. I've mentioned some of the bills that we're working on at the state level. I do encourage folks to look at what is happening in your state because there is potentially a lot more that can be done at the local and state level that is protective of workers and protective of immigrants. then the federal landscape is pretty bleak, and we all know we have to fight back. But a lot of that work is going to look more defensive than offensive. So I think my answer, maybe it's a bit of a dodge, but I would say actually look local and look to your state level to see what is it that we can meaningfully do to protect workers. And then I will also say that I think I would caution against trying to push forward federal legislation that might look more sort of give us some short-term gains, but could really, in the long term, damage farm worker communities. And I mentioned earlier in my presentation about some of the real risks that come with guest worker programs. And so I am, and our organization is among those who are very skeptical of efforts to expand guest worker programs as a solution to this immigration, this crisis of immigration enforcement and the targeting of immigrant communities that we see because of the ways in which that further exposes people to labor abuses. I could say a lot more about that, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, we'll turn to you, and then we're going to open for some questions from the audience and online. You can type them in, and maybe someone who can see it easier can read them out for us. But we'll let you'll take us to the future, and then we'll.
Part of, I guess, what I just want to add is I always like to also emphasize this, that we all know someone, we all know a friend, and in terms of what can you all support with this, like Emma emphasized, take a look what we're doing, and take a look the campaigns, take a look at how possible ways to support, even if you're out of the state. How can you connect with someone that encourage it, that might have some connections with workers that will encourage them to support this campaign? Because around this time it's all about the support. What what we can all build together to create something beautiful. But it's just in a way saying I know the question always comes from everywhere I can give presentation. How can we support? How can we support, right? And sometimes it's just sharing what you have heard here with someone else. You never know who this person might have the biggest connection with someone else, and just spread the word. But right now, it's just the support on all this, campaign support and organizing support on, encouraging our workers to stand up for themselves.
I just will say, I think you're so right. We have to work, acknowledge that right now we're in this moment of community defense. We have to do the community defense work. That's what people need, right? And that is a way that we build trust, show up for people when they need it, right? And also take the long view, right? This is about long-term relationship building, long-term struggle, deep organizing, long-term strategy, right?
And we
Sorry.
No, and I think that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the work that we do. That we all have a common goal, and that's to protect their community, to protect their people, work with our people, and show them that we are there for them even when things are looking, rough. That brings me to my next thing in terms of supporting. We have our caravan going on. It's happening in the next week or so, almost 2 weeks, August 2nd, and that is about saving our rural economy, supporting our farm workers that they can't be there because of the fear of what everything is going on. So all of that and every possible way that you can support will be great, appreciative of that. But one of the things that I was really excited to emphasize, and I will end with that, so we can move on, is our credit union. There are community good credit union that we are currently working on. We just welcome our financial equity coordinator. Her name is Adeline, and we have been, surveying communities and our allies about the need of this credit union in terms of, for example, the issue that we're seeing about the credit union. Also, them getting, charged $25 or $50 just to exchange their paychecks. And I feel like that right there is just an opportunity to show our community how much we really want them to feel that we're there for them in terms of how can we help them building that relationship. They coming in and learning about credit union, and it's a work in progress, but we'll definitely, any questions related to that, our financial equity coordinator will be traveling around the state providing financial literacy, because we also have some, we have come across through our survey that some people don't really trust banks. They don't trust credit unions. Because back home, from where I come from, we don't trust credit unions. We don't trust banks. We are the type of people who would put our money under, somewhere, or because that's the picture that has been painted to us back home. I'm originally from Guatemala, and my father invested all of his money was in a credit union, and then it was gone. The credit union took off, right? And that picture right there is like my father's like, I'm never trusting any bank again. But unfortunately, people who come, to the US, they have that mentality, and then we're like, how can we change that this here is different? And so now we gotta start doing the education and let them know that everything that we're doing is for, the benefit and for your benefit. That how can we ease up on you maybe getting a mortgage, buying a house, or a loan or something. You can have transportation to work. A lot of things are going on, but our credit union is one of them that really want to emphasize in terms of, if you're able to support in any possible way, please, feel free to talk to me. I'm going to be more like Emma said. I'm the type of person that like to talk, and we can spend all day here. I will just cut it right there.
There's a nice yard outside. We can walk around and stroll and chat.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I'll make one small plug for National Farm Worker Ministry. As a national organization connecting with regional partners, we also work to highlight these efforts and bring them to people even who are not in the local area. And so those online and here, we invite you to connect to us with National Farm Worker Ministry, NFWM.org. Also on social media, we work to both bring and highlight the voices of our partners. And so we're very grateful for this time. We'll take a little time now for some questions. I believe maybe 20 or so minutes.
I was just going to say, we have some New York people in the room who came out of the city and are in the area. And so if we could answer what can you do if you're from New York?
We love people from the city.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Julie, Father Richard Witt has joined us
Yes.
right here, and just like recognize and appreciate his
Yes. Richard is the executive director of Rural and Migrant Ministry. We're glad to have you with us.
So we will try to restate what's been stated around the room. I would guess the owl is just barely picking up from that distance. And so it was noted that the executive director, Richard Witt from Rural Migrant Ministries, is in the room now. So we're grateful for his presence. And also for those from the city, there are ways to support. Maybe Emma's not going to jump in on that piece.
Yeah, well, in my earlier presentation, I mentioned a few bills that we're supporting. One is the Empire Worker Protection Act, which is modeled off of a California law called PAGA that would go a long way toward ensuring more effective enforcement of our labor laws in New York State. That is one that we are very much pushing for at the state level, and I think would equip us to fight back more effectively against not just the retaliation that we're seeing among workers who are trying to organize, but also all of the other labor abuses that we see, wage theft and more. So that one is very high on our priority list. The immigrant protection bills that we're focusing on right now are also, I think, high priorities for many organizations in New York, which is the New York for All Sanctuary Bill, and the Care for Immigrant Families campaign, which I mentioned, focuses on increasing funding for immigration legal services and guaranteeing access to representation for immigrants in removal proceedings. There are a lot of other bills. There's also a heat protection bill, the temp bill, that it would cover farm workers, although the Farm Bureau is also trying to fight back on that one, saying that, among other things, that people from these countries are better suited to work in the heat, so don't need those. Yeah, so there's a lot of fights going on that folks from New York can get involved with. And so if you have questions, definitely reach out to me. Love to plug you in.
If you forget about what she just mentioned, go on the website and there is a list of all the bills and actions that are being taken on the Capitol that you might want to join.
Are there any questions or comments from the audience? And again, speak very loudly and also keep it short so I don't need to repeat as much.
So my question is, I mean, I understand the level of fear for the undocumented community, but my recollection is that among farm workers, less than 50% are undocumented. So is that not the case in New York? And also, is there any way to leverage your work with those who are legally present to help those who are not?
Well, this category of undocumented is not always that useful. First of all, I'm not sure if I believe those statistics based on experience.
And
I always see 42%.
Well,
people will put whatever they want to put up there. But so here's what I always like to tell people of this. The fear right now is not only for whoever is, undocumented, it's for everyone is having fear right now. I mean, recently we had one of our a family member of one of our youth empowerment programs that got pulled over and he's a U.S. citizen. And, they pulled him over in excuses of their plates were a little blurry, right? And they called Border Patrol and everything. He was there for about an hour and they could let him go. But why they need to call Border Patrol? He also stated that he was a U.S. citizen. Right, and in terms of also like kind of going back to your questions, as far as I know, I'm not asking for anyone. Are you a document? Are you undocumented? We don't do that. We provide the help. We work with everyone. We do have some people that, and some cases when they have run into some type of issue that they need help with. That's when they disclose to us that their status, right? But other than that, we don't know. Like I can tell you come to our center and you ask me, who might be there? I don't know, and that's the truth. So and a lot of that, I always have a numbers cannot. You really need to be in the ground for a long period of time in order to actually learn about what's going on. And that's why I love questions and I love uncomfortable questions, which is one of our. I think that's a very good question because I love uncomfortable questions because those are questions that we don't often get just because everyone wants to hear the pretty questions, the nice questions, and things like that. But what about the those uncomfortable questions that we are so used to talking about, and that's what we want people from the city to ask. So ask about those questions about what happens in the rural area where where we don't really get to see, where you have a farmer having their employees in a trailer where it's full of cockroaches and rats and all of that there, where and then you tell them that they can change anything because that's how it is, right? So
I was just going to say, this category of undocumented, it's like, partly it's not incredibly useful because there's a lot of people who have work authorization, but that is a precarious status. It's temporary. Maybe they're waiting for an asylum claim to be adjudicated. Maybe they have TPS that just got canceled. Right. Maybe they have deferred action, right? So having work authorization does not make you safe, first of all. And it's very hard to count the number of people who are truly undocumented, meaning they're not on anyone's radar. But a very large proportion of the people we work with have had contact with either immigration court or USCIS. Like they're in the system in some way, shape, or form, or they're guest workers on a visa. Yeah. This status in many ways makes them more vulnerable.
And right? A lot of those numbers are being pulled out databases that really don't show the accuracy of everything. One example, which is actually it's not funny, but also I told my brother that he used it because when for a driver's license, you go into the DMV, you fill out the form, and there's a form that says you don't have a social, and you can say that you don't, and then they just sign the form, blah blah. Well, my brother is a U.S. citizen, he didn't he's like, well, I just wanted a driver's license. So he went in the form and nothing, right? He didn't have he didn't put his social. He got pulled over and gone down by Seneca Falls, Montezuma. I don't know. You are familiar with that. And the officer looked at his ID, and he asked if he was documented, which that's illegal to ask. An officer is not allowed to ask a person, say, "Are you documented?" And my brother said, "Why?" I'm like, "Why are you asking?" And he's like, "Oh, just because your driver's license is not for federal use, so you don't have you don't have a social."
That's also what my driver's license says, for the record.
Yeah,
This is the standard New York driver's license.
Yeah, so then my brother, because my brother likes to be in a smart, and he goes, oh, and the officer apparently was playing it a little bit, cool, and kind of like trying to do not make it seem like he was really being profile and all that. So then my brother got that, so he said, oh, well, I go in out of the country back and forth twice a year. And then he said, I'm a U.S. citizen. He told him after that. And then he's like, oh, so why do you have this type of driver's license? And he's like, well, because I have a passport, and if I want to go into a federal building, I'm going to bring in my passport or something. I don't need to go into a federal building. I don't need this type of driver's license. Plus, it costs too much more money. I said, I don't want to give it. So my brother just made all these things. He's like, oh, okay. But then he called back up, and like he did, by the time he went and checked his driver's license, and by the time he was about to let him go, another two patrols, pulled behind him. And they did, he said, okay, you can go. But then I guess he stayed and explained to the officers, so all of that right there. So people choose not to put things in. Like Emma said, my driver's license is like that too. And mine is not for federal use because I don't have the enhanced driver's license. I have the car passport, which that's enough for me to go anywhere. So numbers can be pulled out of that just because someone didn't provide that information. Like, oh, okay, maybe you are undocumented then, or something, and happens everywhere. But sorry.
Yeah, there's another story about how many farm workers there are in New York State, and this came from a program many years ago that New York State cannot tell you how many farm workers there are in New York State. No one's kept that detail. So far from them being able to tell you how many are documented or undocumented or half documented or have any type of legal statuses. They could tell you the amount of cattle head in the state, not the amount of farm.
So if I may comment about that, long ago, Florida Christian Migrant Ministry was the source of the authoritative count on farm workers in Florida because USDA didn't know. And we had a sort of invented, as best we could, contrived number. If I can ask a quick question.
I actually had one person in queue already. Sorry, you can go and then we'll go back to Sam. Okay, Sam, if you want to keep going, it's fine.
Yeah, well, the question is, there are other worker groups in the country that have organized, United Farm Workers, the dairy workers in Bellingham, Washington, etc. Have you been able to bring workers who know what the benefits of organizing are to come and talk with leaders here? And to what extent can NFWM help by our being a presence in that regard?
Both RMF and the Worker Justice Center are members of the Food Chain Workers Alliance, which includes other farm worker unions. That is one of the spaces where a lot of that interaction and cross-pollination has happened for sure. And yeah, so I think, and I know that also there have been meetings with Flock and there's a lot of those, that is happening. Of course, each local context is different, so there isn't sort of a formulaic, recipe, but yeah.
And we always try to, one of the things that we always try to do is our community will only believe someone else who's going through also the same, path, right? Because I'm a fan of first-hand, experience. So we do help facilitate that. We do bring, someone, we move it around the state saying, okay, we have this person, like when that was happening for educating our workers about, the union, what was all of that about? We brought someone and said, tell us your experience, what do you think? And that's where they start asking all these questions. So we do that as much as possible. Not saying that we do that every single time because it's hard, and also again, it requires a lot of money to bring someone from one place to another and everything. So we try to do that as much as possible.
The question here, and then I see there's one online. We'll give yours first, and then I'll read that off.
Okay, good. Russell is already with the Latin America Caribbean, maybe the Loreto community. We're guests of the National Parliament. And I am from New York, but north of here, 45 minutes north in the Hudson Valley in Witt, where there are, a number of farms. So I'm just loving this information and so I have two questions. One is related to, we're a national community, and how can national communities help and feed into this, work very concretely? And the second one, are you entertaining any initiative like they're doing in California about a path for citizenship for farmers? Any type of activism or protest or webinar or anything like that?
There are no plans for strike as far as I know among New York farm workers. Your question contained multitudes, so let me try to break it down. I think there are people who would love to see that happen. It takes a lot of organizing work, of course, to pull it off. The question about the role of national networks. I think so much of the role of national networks is to create opportunities for knowledge sharing and cross-pollination across regions and localities to uplift the work that's happening locally. I'm pretty skeptical of, I think our work right now on the national level is very much about responding to the level of targeting and repression that's happening nationwide with immigrants just in the crosshairs. But I think what it really looks like to do that work is local, right? Like that is how we are going to organize against what's happening federally. So I think our view has to be national, but I do think our strategies have to be really grounded in local realities. And so what I said before about just making sure that folks are organized into like local community defense efforts, but then are also connecting the dots regionally and nationally. I think that's super critical. I don't see viable pathways to citizenship in the near future under this administration. That said, public opinion is shifting very quickly because of the overreach of the Trump administration. The polling on immigration has swung dramatically in terms of the approval of these tactics. So I have to believe that at some point in the future there will be more openings to talk about meaningful, humane immigration reform. I just don't think it's going to happen under this administration, and I think we should be realistic about that. And I am very worried about some of the proposals that would tie a very, very narrow pathway to citizenship to the widespread implementation of mandatory E-Verify and to the expansion of guest workers. Because if we go the route of essentially, replace it, I think ultimately the long-term view of that approach is to replace the current farm workforce with a majority guest worker force. That is a very institutionally disempowered workforce. And we all know the history, I think, of many of us will know the history of guest worker programs and how rife they are with abuses and how difficult they are to organize. Of course, UFW is doing some organizing with guest workers, but there are so many layers to that question. I hope that's been sufficient.
Thank you. I'll read the question. I'm going to look past you, but you can stay looking this way if you want. What would you do if you witnessed some injustices happening from farm owners toward farm workers in person? Should you say something, report to someone? What should be done if you see this happening in real time? Mistreatment, abuse, etc.
That's a great question. That's what we do.
So maybe the question is, how would you, in your organizational capacity, do that, and then what if sort of general community members?
Because I think it depends on who are you.
Yeah.
Like, who are you witnessing? Are you another worker? Are you an outsider? Our approach is very much worker-centered, right? So we are reporting abuses that we see without a worker saying this is what I want to do on my own behalf, right? So, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but our work is, guided by the the ethical code of the legal profession. So we are going to do what our clients want us to do, right? It doesn't. What our role is to give people all the information that we can to allow them to make an informed and empowered decision in their own best interest, however they see that, right? Of course, there are times when I wish so deeply that somebody would do something about something that is happening to them and they're not ready to. It's not my job, nor would it be appropriate for me to decide it's time for you to take action. I can have difficult conversations with that person. I can help them weigh pros and cons. I can help them work through the challenges, but that is not a decision for me to make. So I guess that's the long and the short of it. It's, from my perspective and from our organization's perspective. And that's part of what makes me different and our organization's work different from that of a union organizer, for example, whose job is to agitate, whose job is to organize. There is certainly a role for that as well.
So just want to pitch in. I have, through many, I've been working with the community for the past, 12, 14 years, and I feel like I have been exposed to all different kinds of issues, that have happened in front of me, heard from a friend that happened to him or them. But part of it's also part of, like Emma said, what role are you playing? And also, two different things. If your presence where you have an employer come in and talk to the employee in a way that the employee has no idea that this is violating the rights, that's where we come in and we assess the situation, and then that's where, depending on how big the issue is, that's when we reach out to our partners, organizations or anyone that will be very helpful with the situation. And one of my favorite ones, it happened during COVID, which we were able to presence. It was when we had this worker in Auburn, in one of the dairy farms, where he was really dying from COVID. And he had a note from the doctor. And in that time, we came to visit. I came to see how he was doing and everything. And he had gone to the doctor, got the letter, and the supervisor arrived and says, "Oh, you need to work tomorrow," and blah blah, and you're coming in at 3 a.m. in the morning. But the doctor's note saying, "No, he can't work. He needs to have 2 weeks of rest." And he said that to I was just standing there, because usually when something like Emma mentioned before, we don't come in and try to get things riled up, and we don't come in to fight the employer. We come in just to educate, help, and so whenever something happens, or whenever we introduce ourselves, we're just standing there, like there's nothing, we we're not gonna interfere with whatever conversation they might have, right? But yeah, but when I was hearing all what he said, and then the worker said, "Oh well, I'm working with this organization," so he pointed at me, and I'm working with, and I know my rights, and I have a letter from the doctor and everything. And the supervisor just said, "Well, we don't care about that." And he's like, "Either you go and work, or you will find a place to go." And the worst thing was that he had a family. He had a family, and a lot of the employers, they provide housing for their families, and so he felt very pressured, and he said, "Oh, I'm gonna work. I'm gonna have to work because I don't have anywhere to go." Right, and that right there, it was just it was crazy. It was just things happening, going on. Actually, I didn't speak with someone who worked for Justice Center.
What's
it? Do you remember? Oh, yeah, it might be too. And
It sounds very familiar.
yeah, and in one of the things, I guess I think it was you. But one of the things right there is when we assess that situation, that's where I say, okay, this is the first person to call, and I have, Emma's direct line. Emma, says, okay, this is the situation, and I believe we ended up working with the Department of Labor at that time. And what the funny thing was that the employer then, because then the supervisor went and told the employer, and the employer just said, well, whatever, you're not going to come and tell me what to do and all of that. And he comes to me because he also knows me. And since then, let me tell you something, since then he avoids me. Every single time I go through his farm, he just goes the other way. But since then, when he came to me, I said, Dan, because that's his name, Dan, just follow the law. Just do what it. And he thought that just by saying, your lawyer can call me anytime because you have my number. And he walked away. Well, he didn't know that the Department of Labor was going to be calling him and not the lawyer, and whoever it was. But I spoke with someone, and then you should have seen immediately he coming back in saying, "Oh, we never said that you had to be working. We never said that we were not going to obey. You got the doctor's letter. The supervisor never told me that you had a doctor's letter." So all of those things, how things change, and we come across that. So is going back to the question is depending the situation, but also having the connections, talking to people, having other people as a sounding board, because also you want to make sure that you are providing the best help possible. Going over the rights of the worker, providing reassurance that they are protected by law if they come and they speak up about what they are going through, and the lawyer cannot come back and say, okay, you're fired because of that, which happens all the time, and we make them get their job back or something.
And I will say we do have very strong anti-retaliation protections in New York labor law, which helps a lot because we had an employer, one of our clients who filed a wage complaint. This wasn't in agriculture, but it could have been. The employer actually told the Department of Labor investigator, "I'm going to call ICE and make this go away." Well, can I tell you how much more he was fined for making that threat than he actually owed in back wages? So there are times when
I love those happy endings.
it doesn't always end that way, but I do think depending on what state you're in, the anti-retaliation protections are really critical.
We're going to pause on the happy story. Do you have any final comments or exhortations for us before we thank you? And as noted, people, I think you're able to linger a little bit if there are other additional questions after the official. Any final remarks?
From my end, I just want to say, stay connected. Don't go home and keep everything to yourself and then be like, oh, if I come across or something, maybe I will ask for money. No, just stay connected. You don't need to be in a very uncomfortable situation, or you don't need to be witnessing an injustice in order for you to connect with Emma, myself, or anyone to learn about what we do and how can you support. And that's all I can say. Just stay connected and look at the work that we are doing in both organizations. Support as much as you can in whatever way possible. And if you have questions, feel free to have it shoot us an email. From my own personal opinion.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. Just I know a lot of you are linked to faith communities. These are really important audiences to amplify this message. We have a lot of work to do narratively in this country. That is so important that we bring these stories to a wider community and begin to shift, the thinking more broadly.
Well, on behalf of the National Farm Worker Ministry, thanks for all coming. Thanks for Worker Justice Center and for Rural Migrant Ministries.